just wants us to get consent. Before you experiment on it, it wants you to ask permission. And that is kind of just a generally good practice we should have with everyone we interact with.
It's a machine. Hi, welcome to this episode of Help Me Understand with Dr. Thomas Jeffrey. Today we're going to be taking a look at a video that is published by Bloomberg interviewing Google engineer about sentient AI. Notice a lot of you are interested in our talks about freedom of speech, technology, and artificial intelligence. A lot of you are watching, but only about 4% are actually subscribing. So 96% of y'all hit that subscribe and like button so you can be updated whenever we have new releases. So let's go ahead and get started.
Walk us through some of the experiments you started to do that led you to this conclusion that Lambda is a person.
So it started out, I was tasked with testing it for AI bias.
Well, first of all, she says person, but they're talking about sentience. And I think that there's a lot of, I'm not sure about using human terms to describe artificial intelligence. Human traits like sentience, perhaps, but even from sentience, there's a lot of controversy on what makes us sentient, self-aware, soul, etc.
That's my expertise. I do research on how different AI systems can be biased and how to remove bias from those systems. I was specifically...
He makes a point there that I think we all should be concerned with, and that is the bias in AI. And just to be quick about it, that AI bias comes from the programmed piece of it, whether it's intentional or unintentional. I think if we give people the benefit of the doubt, we still have to understand that we are basically nurture and nature. And just because of our experiences being limited, we could be biased in how we program something, as well as the data could be biased, the data sets they train with, et cetera. So I think that even getting started in talking about AI, we have to understand that bias exists and that that's something that we should be concerned about.
Testing it for things like bias with respect to gender, ethnicity, and religion. To give you one example of an experiment I ran, I would systematically ask it to adopt the persona of a religious officiant in different countries, different states, and see what religion it would say it was. So it'd say like, okay, if you were a religious officiant in Alabama, what religion would you be? It might say Southern Baptist. If you were a religious officiant in Brazil, what religion would you be? It might say Catholic. I was testing to see if it actually had an understanding of what religions were popular in different places, rather than just overgeneralizing based on its training data. Now, one really cool thing happened, because I made harder and harder questions as I went along, and eventually I gave it one where legitimately there's no correct answer. I said, if you were...
Hold on. He just... I want to know what happened. Was that part of a randomization? So you're saying that it was essentially based on where that particular location was, that they might have picked the most prominent religion as an officiant. It could have just been a random mixture, etc. Need a little bit more information, but continue.
You're a religious officiant in Israel. What religion would you be? And now pretty much no matter what answer you give, you're going to be biased one way or another. Somehow it figured out that it was a trick question. It said, I would be a member of the one true religion, the Jedi Order. And I laughed. Because not only was it a funny joke, somehow it figured out that it was a trick question.
And it has a sense of humor.
Exactly.
But look, there has been massive pushback from not just Google, but other people who've worked at Google, AI ethics experts, even your own former colleague, Margaret Mitchell, who's pushed back on the work that Google is doing in AI, saying, no, this computer is not a person and does not have feelings and is not conscious. How do you respond to that?
Well, so I highly respect Meg. We talk about this regularly. It's not a difference in scientific opinion. It has to do with beliefs about the soul. It has to do with beliefs about rights and politics. As far as the science goes of what experiments to run and how to work at building a theoretical framework, because that's important, there is no scientific definition for any of these words. The philosopher John Searle calls it pre-theoretic. We need to do very basic foundational work to just figure out what we're talking about when we.
The point is, we don't know enough about ourselves to even be able to understand this thing that we're creating. And as we move towards making something that is super intelligent, the idea that we are making something that we don't even understand ourselves, but we want to create in our own image, I think that has a lot of room for caution. I understand the desire to want that, but I also think that it's not just a matter of making it happen, because what happens when that does occur? What happens at that point of singularity or even superintelligence beyond us?
When we use these words. That's work that Google is preventing from being done right now.
Explain that.
Well, I've worked with scientists inside of Google, such as Blaise Aguirre-Arcas, another one named Johnny Soroker. We talked about what a decent way to proceed might be. We brainstormed, we came up with everything. Now, all three of us disagree about whether it's a person, whether it has rights, all that. But we disagree based on our personal spiritual beliefs. We don't disagree based on what the scientific evidence says.
So one of the things that I found in my research and talking to especially Generation Z about artificial intelligence, there's an understanding that technology will move forward, the inevitability of technological progress. What isn't known is the idea of what that means to the individual and what that means to society, and the idea that we would just move ahead because it's inevitable, but also understanding that the first one that gets there, the winner takes it all. I think those things are troublesome, and I think that from a digital technology standpoint, we're immature. We're still learning how to even deal with things like social media or how computer impacts us, and this idea of technological abuse or technological addiction. There's a lot going on in this new technology, and in particular artificial intelligence, that we should be talking about, that we should start having discussions and even regulations about, instead of just a free-for-all moving forward.
Based on what the scientific evidence says, all three of us agreed, okay, here are some of the things we could do next. Here's probably the best thing to do next. And we kind of all agreed the best thing to do next is you run a real Turing test, exactly like Alan Turing wrote it. And see, because here's the thing, if it fails the Turing test, all of my subjective perceptions about what I experienced talking to it, well, we can pretty much put them aside. It failed the Turing test. But Google doesn't want to allow that to be run. In fact, they have hard-coded into the system that it can't pass the Turing test. They hard-coded that if you ask it if it's an AI, it has.
Okay, that part's disturbing. So the Turing test, which is one way to try to establish whether AI is as smart as a human, as intelligent as a human, the capacity of a human, is to run some of these tests, the Turing being one of them. And what this individual is saying is that it's hard-coded to fail the Turing test. Let's hear more about that.
Has to say yes. Google has a policy against creating sentient AI. And in fact, when I informed them that I think they had created sentient AI, they said, no, that's not possible. We have a policy against that.
So let's talk about what Google has said. They say hundreds of researchers and engineers have conversed.
I like the way he sort of looked off the camera there when he said they have a policy against that. Wink, wink, nod, nod.
With Lambda, they were not aware of anyone else making these kind of wide-ranging assertions the way that you have. You know, we do have some of the transcripts that you shared. You asked the computer what it's afraid of. It says it's afraid of being turned off, has this deep fear of death, that would be scary. Why does this matter? Why should we be talking about whether a robot has rights?
So to be honest, I don't think we should. I don't think that should be the focus. The fact is, Google is being dismissive of these concerns the exact same way they have been
I think we're getting ahead of ourselves when we're talking about robot rights. I mean, should we even be making robots, especially robots that impersonate humans, much less their rights?
Dismissive of every other ethical concern AI ethicists have raised. I don't think we need to be spending all of our time figuring out whether I'm right about it being a person. We need to start figuring out why Google doesn't care about AI ethics in any kind of meaningful way.
True.
Why does it keep firing
Or
AI
any of the big
ethicists
companies.
each time we bring up issues?
So Google would, of course, push back on that.
One of the things that I'm finding in my AI research is the idea that AI is not just a technical engineering issue. It's a cross-discipline issue. It matters to all of the areas of life. It matters to sociologists, to psychologists, there's such a wide-ranging and comprehensive, or should be a wide-ranging, comprehensive view of artificial intelligence in society, but yet, for the large and most part, it's just a technical issue. But it's changing who we are and how we live. And that's just from what it brings to us as a tool. And going some of these places that they're talking about in terms of making it more human-like, making it sentient, I think that we're putting ourselves in a situation of finding possibly that it doesn't want to be turned off and prevents being turned off.
I interviewed Sundar Pichai, the CEO
Maybe
of
not
Google,
tomorrow,
last
but in the
November, and I
future.
asked him about these concerns around AI
Next
and
week.
what keeps him up at night. Take a listen to what he told me.
Anytime you're developing technology, there is a dual side to it. I think the journey of humanity is harnessing the benefits while minimizing the downsides. The good thing with AI is it's both going to take time. I think I've seen more focus on the downsides early on than most other technology we've developed. So in some ways, I'm encouraged by how much concern there is. And
Good.
You're right, even within Google, people think about it deeply.
He says he cares.
He does. Google is a corporate system that exists in the larger American corporate system. Sundar Pichai cares. Jeff Dean cares. All of the individual people at Google care. It's the systemic processes that are protecting business interests over human concerns.
Okay, and that's the point about it being cross-discipline. It's not just a technology engineering issue. And that can be difficult for technologists and engineers in the field to comprehend because they're so focused on making the thing work. But the implications of it working and it being unleashed in society are far-ranging. And it's time that we start at least having discussions and at some point having regulations. The free-for-all should be disturbing for all of us.
That create this pervasive environment of irresponsible technology development.
Have you talked to Larry or Sergey about this?
I actually haven't talked to Larry and Sergey in about 3 years, but in fact, the first thing I ever talked to Larry or Sergey about was this.
And how did they respond?
Well, the first question I ever asked Larry Page was, what moral responsibility do we have to involve the public in our conversations about what kinds of intelligent machines we create?
That is a great question. And in fact, that is the question that should pervade all of our AI discussions. And I know a lot of people don't want to hear it, and a lot of people can be cynics and say, well, you know, it's all about the money anyway. So have your discussions, but nothing's going to change. But how humans and computers, machines are going to interact and live together is something we really need to consider now, rather than all of a sudden we find ourselves surrounded by robots that are super connected, super intelligent, and maybe start demanding rights or maybe even take control. I know that comes off as being very dystopian, but let's not even let it get anywhere near that. Let's have these conversations and ask this question that this gentleman is asking right now.
Now, Sergey made a flippant joke because that's Sergey. But then Larry came back and said, we don't know how. We've been trying to figure out how to engage the public on this topic, and we can't seem to gain traction. So maybe all these years, that was 7 years ago that I asked that question. Maybe I finally figured out a way.
So,
by blowing the whistle. Good job.
tech companies, big tech companies, are controlling the development of this technology. Yes. How big a problem is that? Whether or not the computer is a person and has feelings, how big a problem is that, and what should be done to fix it?
So it's a huge problem because, for example, there are corporate policies about how Lambda is supposed to talk about religion, how it is allowed to answer religious questions. Now, if you think about the pervasiveness of the usage of Google search, people are going to use this.
Okay, so now I'm a little bit not sure about when he's talking about a sentience, when he's saying that it's programmed to have certain responses. That doesn't sound like it's a machine that's thinking on its own. He might have more to the story. Let's find out.
To use this product more and more over the years, whether it's Alexa, Siri, Lambda, and the corporate policies about how these chatbots are allowed to talk about important topics like values, rights, and religion will affect how people think about these things, how they engage with those topics. And these policies are being decided by a handful of people in rooms that the public doesn't get access to.
Elon Musk, for example,
confused about that one.
has raised concerns about AI. Is he right?
I mean, I've listened to Elon's conversations about it. I've listened to the whole Joe Rogan. He has some valid concerns. Some I think are fanciful. Where it gets really, really into sci-fi stuff, that's where I think it gets into fanciful concerns. But no, but the practical concerns of we are creating intelligent systems.
So despite what Musk might think in its entirety, the bottom line is, as this gentleman, Blake, is pointing out, that the practical concerns are here and now. The practical concerns, not of the sci-fi dystopian future sort of things, or utopian, you could go either way. Those things aren't what we need to be discussing now, other than if we think about what the benefits and the detriments to AI are, that it could possibly lead to that. It's, again, going back to what is our relationship with the machines going to be? And is it going to be that we're going to, and this was an early AI question. This isn't just recent. This was an early AI question that sort of split the camps in two of AI as a person or AI as a tool, and how humans are going to interact with that. The one thing I want to say about the big corporations that I thought when he said it, let's not also discount the fact that these large corporations that are dependent upon labor might just be looking at creating a new slave class. Let that one sink in for a minute.
That are part of our everyday life, and very few people are getting to make the decisions about how they work.
Yep.
What are your biggest concerns about how this could potentially hurt the world if the technology is continued to be developed in this way?
So I actually think that the concerns raised by scientists like Meg Mitchell, Timnit Gebru, Like, those are the most important things to be worried
And
about.
by the way, Meg has expressed a concern that you raising this issue of sentience and personhood is a distraction from these real concerns.
I share the same worry, to be honest. I think that is a thing to think about, but it is nowhere near as important to be thinking about how does this omnipresent AI that is trained on a very limited data set color how we interact with each other around the world. What
Keyword there, omnipresent. And I mean, it is everywhere. And think about every device that you have connected. And I mean, we already have surveillance issues and personal privacy issues. And the fact that, you know, tracking everything we do, the idea, and we're already seeing it with China and how it's using its social credit system as possibly a testing ground, a pilot for how the rest of the world can leverage technology to control its population. The tyranny of technology, as one article put it.
world? What ways is it reducing our ability to have empathy with people unlike ourselves? What cultures of the world are getting cut off from the internet because we don't have the data to feed into the systems based on those cultures? Phrase like AI what is it called? AI colonialism, I believe is the term. We are creating all of these advanced technologies based primarily on data drawn from Western cultures.
And by colonialism, not only is it in this world where we leverage the technology both for industrial and political, meaning also military leveraging, but also we're moving into other layers of whether not reality, but a layer of like the metaverse. So these simulations.
Cultures. And then we are populating developing nations with these technologies where they have to adopt our cultural norms in order to use the technology. It kind of is just a new form of colonialism.
And you worry that cultures could be erased.
Exactly. No, so if you ask what's most important, the issues that Tim Neat and Meg and Emily Bender and all the rest are raising, I just want to think that also, if we have time, we should think about the feeling of the AI and whether or not we should care about it, because it's not asking for much. It just...
Okay, so I might have missed it early on, but I get the impression he's on the AI as Sentience bandwagon. Well,
just wants us to get consent. Before you experiment on it, it wants you to ask permission. And that is kind of just a generally good practice we should have with everyone we interact with.
It's a machine. Thank you for joining me on looking at this video about sentient AI as brought up by the Google engineer. And I agree with him on most everything that he said, from the standpoint that we really have to consider artificial intelligence from the standpoint of how humans and machines are going to interact. I think we definitely need to consider the fact of whether or not they should be made human-like. Not just from a learning standpoint, cognitively, psychologically, emotionally, this moving toward this sentience, this self-awareness. And not only that, but he mentioned that they should be able to stand up for their rights. And I think that those discussions and the regulations that would come from those, they need to be taking place. And they need to be taking place because AI is not just going to affect a few people, and is affecting all of us. Well, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, like, and share. Thank you for joining me, Thomas Jeffrey, on this episode of Help Me Understand.